that the police had their weapons drawn. Apparently a young lady did not want to wear her burqa. She wanted to keep going to school, and that the community, according to the Steve Day show, decided that one of the members of the community in Des Moines needed to go behead her. And so I'm wondering, and I have that audio, I'm wondering, Senator, future president, God willing, what is the need for, one of our representatives, Sandy Salmon, has legislation that is tied up by rhinos right now in Des Moines, I'm supposed to call, that says you can't practice Sharia law in Iowa or Des Moines neighborhoods. And I'm wondering, why is there a need for that? We have federal laws, we have state laws, we have local laws. Is it important to get that? Does that really need to be done? How is this happening here?
So how recently did this happen?
It's been over a year.
Okay.
Steve Dace, one of my heroes.
Yeah, look, I know Steve very, very well. Steve Dace is a phenomenal voice for freedom. And what you're describing here, sadly, there have been instances across the country. And in my view, under no circumstances should Sharia law be enforced in the United States of America. And we should do whatever is necessary to prevent that, whether that is state legislation, whether that is judicial reform, whether that is federal legislation. And I have spent decades of my life fighting to protect the Constitution and fighting to prevent international law, foreign law from being imported into our justice system. And you have my word as president, I will continue to do that, and in particular also keep a narrow and focused eye on defeating Islamism. It's important to understand what Islamism is. Islamism is a religious and political philosophy that mandates to its adherents violent jihad, that they either murder or forcibly convert any they deem to be an infidel and force them to live under Sharia law. And we are battling Islamism across the world, and we need the same laser-focused, clear-eyed foreign policy that Ronald Reagan had in the Cold War. When people asked his philosophy, my philosophy on radical Islamic terrorism, to borrow a page from Reagan, is very simple. We win, they lose. Yes, ma'am.
There was a war established by President Nixon back in the 70s, and still almost 600,000 people a year are dying. Still, you know what the war is? It was the war on cancer. And now that we're getting some hope with immunology, why can't we have information out to the people who need it? Because there are people with end-stage terminal disease. I mean, I don't know. I bet everybody here has been affected by cancer. And I had 2 stage 4 cancers at the same time. And thanks to Mayo and some alternative stuff that I did, I'm still alive 10 years later. But what I'm trying to say is, well, Jimmy Carter, you know, he was diagnosed last summer.
Yep.
You know what he is now? Have you heard? No.
Yep.
4 little brain tumors. He had some liver tumors because of the immunology. Now, when can we get some of that information out? Because I think there's maybe other people here that might be interested in it.
Well, thank you, ma'am, for raising that question. Let me say, first of all, praise God that you're in remission. My mom is a breast cancer survivor, and she's been 15 years since she was diagnosed, and it is a difficult journey for those with cancer and for those family members. And I agree with you that we need a much more focused direction on curing deadly diseases. You know, I'm the chairman in the Senate of the Science and Space Subcommittee of the Commerce Committee. And a few months ago, I chaired a hearing on cures to diseases, looking at the most devastating diseases, looking at cancer, looking at heart disease, looking at Alzheimer's, looking at diabetes, and bringing in testimonies from experts. How close are we to cures? of these horrible diseases? What would it take in terms of research dollars, of focused attention, of research prizes to move the research for a cure on? And in my view, curing these diseases is an absolute no-brainer, and it is the most conservative policy you can imagine. Number one, curing any one of those diseases would save millions upon millions upon millions of lives. But it would also save trillions of dollars. It is an enormous cost saver at the same time that it's humanitarian and valuing human life. And so I think we need to dramatically increase the resources directed at research. And I'll tell you, one of the real impediments is the FDA. And the barriers at the FDA to take a new drug to market, to take a new medical device to market, can take years or over a decade. It can take over $1 billion to take one product to market. And that cost is enormous, and it's unnecessary. I filed legislation to reform the FDA process. So, for example, my understanding is the treatment that President Carter received was actually originally developed in Israel. And it was cutting-edge treatment. You know, in many parts of the world, it's much easier to get a new drug or new life-saving treatment approved. So the FDA legislation that I've introduced in the Senate provides that if any drug or medical device has been approved in another major developed country, approved in Europe or the major developed countries of Asia, that the FDA has 30 days to approve it here, and if not, it goes straight to Congress for an up or down vote. There's no reason Americans should be delayed years or have to get on a plane and fly to some foreign country to get a life-saving treatment because their federal government is standing in the way of progress and doing everything possible to save their lives.
Hear, hear.
Yes, sir. It is a very good and very important question, and I would note that it connects to the earlier question about Sharia law and international law. These two are intertwined. You know, let me describe for you, because it's easy. Talk is cheap. So let me actually talk to you about my record on this issue. So before I was in the U.S. Senate, I was the Solicitor General of Texas, which is the chief lawyer for the state in front of the United States Supreme Court. And I held that position 5.5 years. And in that time, we litigated and won some of the biggest conservative fights in the country. So we defended the Ten Commandments monument, went to the Supreme Court and won 5-4. We defended the Pledge of Allegiance, won unanimously. We defended the Second Amendment, won 5-4. The single biggest victory, though, of my time, and the biggest fight of my time as Solicitor General, was a case called Medellin versus Texas. And let me describe it to you because it's directly related to what you asked. Medellin versus Texas began with a really horrific crime in my hometown of Houston, where 2 teenage girls were tragically assaulted and murdered by a gang in Houston. It was a horrible crime, what they did to these little girls. The case took a very, very strange turn when the World Court, which is the judicial arm of the United Nations, issued an order to the United States to reopen the convictions of 51 murderers across this country. One of those 51 was Jose Ernesto Medellin, an illegal alien from Mexico who had crossed in illegally and was one of those gang members who had murdered those 2 little girls. Texas stood up and we fought the World Court of the United Nations. I argued this case twice in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. On the other side, we had the World Court, we had the United Nations, we had 90 foreign nations came in against the state of Texas. And we also had the President of the United States. And I'm sorry to tell you that wasn't Barack Obama. It was George W. Bush. Now, I'll tell you, it was an interesting moment. When I sat down with the Texas Attorney General, who was my boss, we talked about what to do in that case. Because it was pretty unusual for Texas to go in front of the U.S. Supreme Court and oppose the president. But George W. Bush signed a 2-paragraph order that attempted to order the state courts to obey the World Court and the United Nations. And needless to say, George W. Bush was a Texan. He was a former governor of our state. He was a Republican. He was a friend. And yet I'm proud to tell you, I went before the U.S. Supreme Court twice arguing that Republican president lacked the constitutional authority to give up U.S. sovereignty to any international tribunal. And the Supreme Court ruled 6-3, we won. They ruled, number one, neither the World Court nor the United Nations has any authority whatsoever in the U.S. justice system. And number two, that no president, Democrat or Republican, can give up U.S. sovereignty. I have spent decades as a passionate defender of American sovereignty, and I give you my word that every day as president I will fight to preserve and strengthen our sovereignty and to prevent any foreign body, any foreign tribunal, any foreign law from having any force whatsoever in the United States of America. We'll do two more. Raphael.
Raphael Cruz, and I said, put your phone away. She texted me and I said, put your phone away and have a conversation with her. And she listened to her mom.
Could you tell that to my daughter?
She did, and she listened to him and called me back that night after she got back home. And she said, Mom, this man is so passionate. And I said, that's where it gets it from. So, you know, that was awesome. So anyway, this is our question. I just recently finished college. And of course, my daughter's going to college. I have one that graduated 15 years ago from college, and a daughter that's 16, so she's going to be going to college. So we don't expect free education. You know, we expect to pay for it. But our student loans have interest rates of 6 to 10% without the ability to refinance because it's been authorized by our federal government. I could buy a house at 3.5%, but my student loans are twice that or more. Please tell me what can be done to rectify this.
Well, it's a great question. Thank you for sharing the story about your daughter having dinner with my dad. I'll pass that on to him, and he will appreciate that. Listen, your daughter's situation, congratulations, by the way. You said you recently graduated college as well.
Yeah, I lost my job. I went down to Mexico, so I had to go back.
Well,
But I still had to take out loans myself.
look.
Here I am in my 50s, and I have that loan.
Well, congratulations, and congratulations to your daughter as well. You know, I'll share at the outset, I understand very much what you're facing, what your daughter's facing, what so many people coming out of school are facing. You know, when I was in high school, my parents went bankrupt. And I was a junior in high school when their company went under, and then they lost everything. And so when I went to college, I was 17 and I found myself financially independent involuntarily. That had not been my plan. And so I ended up taking 2 jobs to help pay my way through school. And through the course of college and grad school, I took about $100,000 in school loans. I just paid off my school loans 5-6 years ago. So I understand firsthand what it's like to come out of school with a mortgage, but no house. And there are young people all across this country facing that dynamic. We need to do a couple of things. Number one, what the Obama administration did is it nationalized the student loan industry. It put every private lender out of business and sucked it all in the government. There's no reason on earth that the federal government should be a bank. We should privatize that again and allow private sector competition to play out in the student loan industry. So I think you asked if I could do that the first week. I probably can't, because I believe it would take legislation to do it. And one of the reasons, by the way, I lay out what I do in the first day is, unlike Barack Obama, I am going to be governed by federal law and the Constitution. So under federal law, there are a lot of things a president can do on day one. Everything done by Barack Obama abusing his power through executive power can be undone through executive power. But when it comes to changing statute, that you've got to work through Congress, and that takes time. But let me say, secondly, for people coming out of school and facing student loans, the single biggest problem is that when people come out of school, they can't find a job. Or if they do find a job, they're scared, gosh, is it going to be part-time? Am I going to get skills? Am I actually going to work towards a career? And it wasn't that long ago when we had an economy that was booming, that young people, when they would come out of school, they'd get 3, 4, 5 job offers. And you'd have a brighter future. That's what we can get back to. And that's really the challenge for all of us in this election, is help people see it again and believe again. How do you get back to that environment? The job creators are small businesses. 2/3 of all new jobs come from small businesses. And the key to small businesses being able to create jobs is tax reform and regulatory reform, lifting the tax burdens and regulatory burdens so innovators can create new jobs. And it's why my top 2 legislative priorities are repealing Obamacare and passing a flat tax, because those will unleash an avalanche of small business expansion, of new jobs, of opportunities, which means young people coming out of school will have high-paying jobs and be able to pay off their loans, particularly in a privatized student loan industry. All right, last question. Yes, ma'am.
Do you consider the Fed constitutional, and what can you do to get the country back on a sound fiscal model?
Okay, so the question is, do I consider the Fed constitutional, and what can I do to get this country back on a sound fiscal policy? We have had the Fed a long time. And I will say, I think the Fed's behavior is highly problematic. I am deeply concerned about the Fed. So I am an original co-sponsor of Ron Paul's Audit the Fed bill. I think we need to start with real transparency and accountability. I also think, we went off the gold standard in the early 1970s. And if you compare American economic expansion prior to that point and after that point, there have been more booms and busts, more volatility. What we've discovered is that a bunch of economists acting like philosopher kings are not very good at doing what they're doing, and I believe it is critically important that we have sound money. That we have money that is steady and reliable. What the Fed is doing, we've been doing this QE1, QE2, QE3, QE affinity, this experiment that ends up debasing the dollar. It's an incredible tax on seniors, on people who have saved as their savings are undermined. Remember when CDs used to pay something? And it also is an enormous drag on economic growth, because investors don't want to put capital to work if they don't know what the dollar is worth tomorrow. And so I believe we should study looking at a rules-based monetary system, and ideally looking back at going back to a gold standard that ties a steady value to the dollar so we know what it is today, tomorrow, and the next day. All right, we'll do one more.
Thank you. My name is Dean. I'm from Webster City. I wanted to ask, when you talk about jobs, as wonderful as it is to create jobs through more small businesses being started. That's great. We all love that. But what do we do with open borders and overstayed visas who are taking a lot of jobs that Americans could do if they needed to work those 3 jobs in order to survive in the 70s, like you spoke of, like we did. We did what we had to do to pay the bills. And we're proud to do it as Americans who serve this country. What's your plan?
So, ma'am, thank you very much for the question. The question is, one of the key aspects of jobs is illegal immigration, people coming over illegally, overstaying their visas. That's taking jobs, it's driving down wages. How do we fix this problem? If you go to our website, which is tedcruz.org, we have a very, very detailed 11-page, single-spaced immigration plan that we've laid out, chapter and verse, exactly what we're going to do. I'll tell you, I designed that immigration plan sitting down and working very, very closely with Steve King and also with Senator Jeff Sessions. The 3 of us designed it together. It is the most aggressive plan of any presidential candidate to actually secure the border and solve the problem. And let's talk some particulars. We will build the wall. Existing federal law. You know, existing federal law requires 700 miles of reinforced fencing right now. You know how many miles President Obama has allowed to be built?
None.
36. He's just ignoring the law. It's written there in the statute. And he just says, no, I won't do it. We will triple the Border Patrol. Texas, we've got 1,200 miles of border with the Rio Grande. When you talk to law enforcement on the ground, Steve spent a lot of time down there. Consistently, they say the #1 preventative is boots on the ground. We're going to triple the Border Patrol. We're going to increase 4-fold the fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft so that you have the technology to monitor an attempted incursion and send the boots on the ground exactly where the people are going. In addition to that, we're going to put in place a strong E-Verify system so no one here illegally can get a job unless you can demonstrate you are in fact here legally. Your question mentioned visa overstays, which shows you've looked at this issue quite closely. Many people don't know 40% of illegal immigration is not people crossing the border illegally. It's people who come legally on a visa and just don't leave. Existing federal law requires a biometric exit-entry system on visas. Once again, President Obama simply refuses to follow the law. We will impose a biometric exit-entry system so the day someone overstays their visa, we'll know it and be able to go and get them and put them on a plane to go home. And I'll mention, in addition to that, I mentioned sanctuary cities. There are 360 jurisdictions in this country. They're sanctuary cities that openly defy federal immigration law. Every single one of them will find their federal taxpayer dollars cut off. And on top of that, we will end welfare benefits for those here illegally. And the simple truth is, look, folks in the media will tell you we can't solve this problem. What utter nonsense. We know how to solve these problems. We know what works. If you go to Israel, the wall in Israel works just fine because there it's a matter of national security and survival. What is missing is the political will to get it done, and I give you my word, we will secure the border and we will end illegal immigration. Everything that can be implemented unilaterally will be done and will be done in the earliest weeks and months of the administration. And that requires legislation will be pressed for in the earliest weeks and months of the legislation and will be passed as soon as Congress gets it done. But I'll tell you, it's a very different story when it's the president pressing for it to happen. You'll suddenly see Republican leadership acting like Republican leadership. All right, so Steve raised one additional question. He said there may be someone here wondering about ethanol. So let's talk about that for a second. Listen, my view on energy is very simple. God has blessed this country with enormous natural resources, energy resources. I believe we should pursue an all-of-the-above energy policy. We should develop all of our resources, oil and gas and coal and nuclear and wind and solar and biofuels and ethanol, all of the above. But I do not believe that Washington should pick winners and losers, and there should be no mandates and no subsidies across the board. Let me finish laying out my position for a minute, if I could. Now, with respect to subsidies, I mentioned my tax plan. If you want to see the full details of my tax plan, again, it's on the website, tedcruz.org. It is a simple flat tax, a 10% flat tax for individuals, and a 16% business flat tax, and it eliminates all of the other taxes. It eliminates the corporate income tax, it eliminates the death tax, it eliminates the payroll tax, it eliminates the Obamacare taxes, and it's a simple flat tax for everyone. The flat tax that I proposed eliminates all of the energy mandates and subsidies for everyone. So there's no mandates and subsidies for oil and gas, for wind, for solar, for anybody else. It is a level playing field so that all energy sources are competing equally. Now let's talk specifically about the RFS. Many of y'all may have seen there are a whole bunch of lobbyists and a bunch of Democrats who are spending a ton of money trying to convince Iowans that I somehow don't like ethanol and don't like corn. It is utter nonsense. Now, my view on the RFS, because I believe there should be no mandates for anything, is that we should phase the RFS out over 5 years, and I filed legislation to do that. But that should be on a level playing field with no subsidies for anyone. And I'll tell you, there's a reason the lobbyists want everyone focused on the RFS. Because it keeps Washington front and center. It makes the politicians the most important players. It keeps Iowa dependent on Washington. There is a far more, and then by the way, that makes the lobbyists rich. It's a very good arrangement. When Iowa is dependent on Washington, it means the lobbyists can keep extracting a whole lot of paychecks. There's a far more important government regulation than the RFS. And that is the EPA has in place a hard blend wall that effectively makes it illegal to sell gasolines with higher ethanol blends than either E10 or E50. That means, as a practical matter, you cannot sell on the market E25 or E30 mid-level ethanol blends. As president, I will rescind the EPA blend wall. Now, what does that mean? What are the impacts of that? Well, what that would do, rescinding that, would enable automakers to begin selling cars with engines optimized for mid-level ethanol. They sell them right now in Europe and Brazil. They don't sell them here because it's illegal to sell the fuel for them. How big an impact would that have on the ethanol market? Well, one of the people who is here with us today is Dave Vandergrind. Dave here has built more than half of the ethanol plants in the state of Iowa. Dave knows as much or more about ethanol as any person you will find. His entire business and livelihood has been building ethanol plants in Iowa and across the country. Dave has estimated that eliminating